Unpacking, the Atlantic report on the signal coordination of the Houthi attacks. Also, a groundbreaking New York Times report that is telling us that paper bags and cloth reusable bags at grocery stores aren't actually helping the environment. All that and more today on 10 Minute Drill.
Everybody get up, get up.
The story of America is the story of an adventure.
I can hear you. The rest of the world hears you.
We are a nation under God, and I believe God intended for us to be free.
Earlier this week, The Atlantic released a wild report showing that editor Jeffrey Goldberg had been unintentionally added to a Signal chat, including Michael Walz, Pete Hegseth, and other top members of President Trump's cabinet as they coordinated an attack on the Houthi pirates. It was a couple hours before the attack itself happened and included some details about what was going to be carried out. This created a firestorm. Let's talk about what they're saying. First, Republicans are defending it by saying, here's what Michael Walz said: no locations, no sources and methods, no war plans. Foreign partners had already been notified that strikes were imminent. President Trump in a cabinet meeting addressed this.
It wasn't classified information, so this was not classified. Now, if it's classified information, it's probably a little bit different. But I always say you have to learn from every experience.
Here's what Democrats are saying. First, Senator Elizabeth Warren.
If Pete Hegseth had a shred of self-respect and decency, he would resign.
Then top Democrat on the Senate Intelligence Committee, Mark Warner, said this.
I think Pete Hegseth should resign for putting forward these military plans on this unsecured channel. Obviously, Mike Walz should resign.
Now, as you hear both the Republican defenses and the Democrat attacks, it's important to separate what's political versus what's really happening. Now, when you talk about what's really happening, Republicans in the Senate have already said, we want to hear an inspector's general report about what happened. We also want to have a classified briefing about this. So they're not brushing this under the rug, which I think is really important. But as you analyze this Democrat response, it's important to consider the credibility of their attacks. First, when you hear from someone like Elizabeth Warren, you will hear Republicans come out and say, Elizabeth Warren didn't demand accountability from anybody for the fall of Afghanistan or the death of 13 service members at Abbey Gate. When you see a Democrat like Eric Swalwell call for resignations, Republicans will say he had a relationship with a Chinese spy. Who's he to call this out? Or you might hear someone like Jasmine Crockett, who will openly say they want this story to take over for their own issues. For example, Jasmine Crockett made a firestorm yesterday when she attacked Texas Governor Greg Abbott for being in a wheelchair.
Y'all know we got Governor Hot Wheels down there. Come on now.
Personally, I think Governor Hot Wheels would make a great t-shirt for Abbott to sell. But Crockett later said the quiet part out loud when she said that people shouldn't be listening to her errors or talking about her errors. They should be focused on Republicans. Democrats are hoping they can use this story to get out of their own morass of all of these terrible polling stories showing the Democrats are at their most unpopular position in modern history. Now, I want to be very clear here. Whataboutism in this case is not a compelling defense. Anyone who thinks that this is a big deal, which many people do, are not going to be persuaded it's not a big deal when they hear someone say, what about this issue under Joe Biden? What about this issue under Hillary Clinton? However, those issues do make a big impact on the ability of Democrats to apply political pressure on President Trump. Every person in that Signal chat serves at the pleasure of the president. So the only person who will decide their future, whether they are forced to resign or be fired or anything like that, is President Trump. And so political pressure is the entire ballgame here. And Democrats, after the last 4 years, don't have as much capital there to drive this and really exert political pressure on President Trump, who has already said he's sticking with his guys here. As a communications advisor, if I was advising any member of this story, what I would say is take the victory lap. The attack on the Houthis has been incredibly successful, and Americans love killing terrorists. Then acknowledge a mistake was made. Everyone agrees with that. Mike Walz went on TV and said, I take full responsibility for this. Acknowledge how this is going to be changed and how adjustments are going to be made so this doesn't happen again, and then put it behind you. Move on. There are so many other important stories going on. President Trump has so many actions he's taking on any given day. It will not be difficult to put this behind you. Americans for Public Trust, a watchdog group, just released a bombshell report that found that $60 billion has been fed into American universities by foreign governments, with nearly $1 billion of that coming directly from American adversaries. Americans for Public Trust Executive Director Caitlin Sutherland talked about that on Fox Business yesterday.
This is a huge problem because, Maria, as you know, money buys influence. Money buys power, it buys access, and this foreign money can be used to influence research, it can be used to influence curriculum, it can influence student bodies.
This comes as all eyes are on college campuses, both with a rise in issues like anti-Semitism, but also in the last few years as university administrators have come before Congress and failed to be able to explain the rise in radicalism and political dynamics around them. Next Tuesday, April 1st, is Election Day in Wisconsin for the state Supreme Court. Conservative choice Brad Schimmel faces off against Susan Crawford. It has become a proxy war and an early test of the political dynamics before the midterms. President Trump endorsed Schimmel over the weekend, and the liberal nominee Crawford has been endorsed by Barack Obama, every major Democrat donor from Reid Hoffman to George Soros. One of the biggest issues that has come up in this race is Crawford's own record of giving light sentences to sexual predators.
That you oversaw a case where a man has sexually assaulted a 7-year-old girl by touching her inappropriately in a swimming pool, and you handed down a 4-year jail sentence with 6 years of supervision, which was short of the 10-year jail sentence that I believe was recommended or could have been handed down.
I felt that it was a decision that is going to protect families and children and communities in Wisconsin. So I do stand by that decision and the other decisions that I've made as a judge.
This issue has hounded Democrats for the last several years. Being soft on crime has chased elected officials out of bigger cities like San Francisco and elsewhere. And we expect that that might play a big role in Tuesday's election. On Tuesday, President Trump announced a new executive order requiring proof of citizenship to vote in American elections, with penalties for states that refuse to do that. This is an interesting issue. Honest Elections Project, a group that promotes election integrity across the country, polled this and found 89% of people believe only American citizens should be allowed to vote in our election. That includes 82% of Democrats, 80% of black voters, and 78% of Hispanic voters. So as Democrats rally against this and have already begun to file lawsuits against this executive order, they're once again in the terrible position of having to fight against a 90-10 issue. And some members of the media have tried to dismiss this issue, saying it doesn't happen very often, it's not that big of a deal. I think most people would agree if it happens at all, it's a big deal, particularly when you consider how close some of these elections are. But a number of big blue cities like San Francisco, New York, Washington, D.C. have had initiatives to allow non-citizens to vote in their elections. At the same time, there have been reports that have found in a state like Virginia, for example, in 2023, a report found that as many as 800 people or 800 fraudulent ballots had been filed by non-citizens. So I think this is an important issue that we're going to continue to track here. Today, we have two very special You Can't Make It Up segments. First, my favorite, tough guy Tim Walz. As you'll remember, he is on a tour that nobody asked for to go out and speak to Republican voters who he has said are being ignored because Republicans aren't holding enough town halls. Now, you'll remember, as we've talked about a lot here, these town hall events have largely been taken over by coordinated Democrat attacks from groups like George Soros and Arabella Advisors. So Tim Walz marched out and said he's going to hold town halls in red states and red cities. And he even did a media tour where he said he thought he could overcome any Trump supporter in a physical altercation.
I think I could kick most of their ass. I do think that if they wanted to. I know I can outrun them.
That makes this report all the more hilarious. Tim Walz has been found banning Republicans and people wearing MAGA hats from his events. Some have called it an opportunity for him to only hear from people who like him. Who's tough now, Tim? Our second You Can't Make It Up statement, and perhaps my favorite story of the day, a bombshell New York Times report has found paper bags and reusable cloth bags are not better for the environment. This is particularly notable after the last 10 years when particularly blue states have tried to completely change behaviors to force out plastic bags. Now we're finding in landfills, paper bags produce methane and CO2. Paper bags tend to require more energy to produce than plastic ones. A big shout out to Michael Knowles, who's been driving this train for quite a long time, and a hilarious turn of events that once again reminds us that the climate movement is not about saving the climate. It's about changing and forcing behaviors. That is all the time we have today. Thank you so much for joining us at 10 Minute Drill. Please subscribe on YouTube. Make sure you follow us on all your podcast platforms. Tell your friends. Thanks again for being here.